The Federal Reserve just cut interest rates and everybody is cheering it on like it is something that we should be doing. But I'm here to tell you that I think it is actually the opposite. And the reason being is because of a few different things that we've seen in history. And with the amount of inflation running hot, it leads me to believe that this could lead to the 1970s type of stagflation. But there was something that happened before that stagflation that it looks oh so similar to maybe the worst Fed chair in history. Of course, that might be a hyperbole, but the similarities are shocking. So I'm going to dive into all of that. But first, we've got to dive into the recent Fed decision to cut interest rates by 25 basis points. So Powell obviously prefaces all of this by saying there's no risk-free rate where a place to go, right? But the Fed officials were split, which I think is interesting. Some said that they should cut by more. Some say that they shouldn't even cut at all. And this was the final Fed decision of the entire year. But Jerome Powell has said that it's going to be challenging with both sides, and it's all about the tension there. And, there is some division within the Fed, which lowering these interest rates and doing all these things has expanded that. But the thing that I think is interesting is that policymakers only foresee one rate cut in all of 2026. Now, if you've been following this channel, you know that I have been talking about how essentially Donald Trump wants 0% interest rates. So he's not going to put in a Fed chair who's not going to want more QE. So it's interesting with this looming decision here coming forward that everybody's just like, oh, the only one interest rate cut in all of 26. I mean, it must be like they know something that I don't. I mean, obviously, we see inflation still running hot with core still around 3%. And, there's still a lot of issues there. But I think the benefit of, maybe some clarity or taking it out of the hands of the humans here is that we could let the natural free state of the market do what a natural free state of the market is. The reality is that we're seeing a lot of market manipulation going on, and this is all because of the human intervening. So when we keep on looking in and diving into the way that the Fed is going, they're obviously looking at the job market. The labor market is weak. There's no way, shape around it, right? The unemployment rate is increasing, yet inflation is still hot. So they're not cutting in rates in spite of inflation. They're cutting rates because the job market is showing a lot of weakness. They need to get these jobs back flowing. They need to get people back in the office. They need to get money starting flowing back and forth. And cutting this interest rate by the third straight time, I think is really interesting because it should make it slightly cheaper to get money, to buy a car, expand a business, all of these different things. But inflation is still well above that target, which is something that I'm going to keep watching. And, for those of you who keep coming back, make sure you hit that subscribe button with the bell notifications for me. 95% of you guys, literally, that watch this channel are not subscribed. So help me get to 1,000 here. But inflation still well above that target. Unemployment also creeping up. Fed policymakers dividing, and now we're starting to cut again. Now, we were cutting into a recession in 2008, and I don't think we're going to see those drastics of cuts like we did see in 2008, but there's something else that I think is really interesting, right? Because everybody's losing faith in the dollar. We're seeing China and all of these other countries move out of the dollar into things like gold, precious metal market, all of these different things, right? But the reality is that the economy still isn't as strong as everybody is putting it out to be. Even though we have the S&P 500 with the highest close in history and now up 42% since the April 2025 bottom. I mean, it's insane, right? When you continue to watch all of this, that everybody is flooding into precious metals, everybody's flushing into markets, everything outside of holding the dollar, everybody is looking at how this is developing, right? And this is now how the Fed is going to be, I guess, judged, right? The Fed chair, conditions in the labor market are cooling and inflation remains somewhat elevated. Yet another way to say stagflation. Look, that's of course their little 2 cents. And they took the words out of my mouth because if you look at the 1970s stagflation, the time is very similar to what we've got going on right now. We had high inflation, prices rose, but this was fueled by oil. Obviously, ours is not necessarily fueled by that. So, stagflation fueled by oil, it's got high unemployment. But this also had the Vietnam War, some other aspects, right? Ours obviously is not followed by the Vietnam War or some oil embargo, but there is looming energy crisis with the amount of AI and Fidelity and some of these bigger guys are actually looking at, hey, are we in stagflation? Because inflation is persisting while unemployment and consumer sentiment suggest that growth may slow. But they're all saying, oh, don't worry about it, man. It's no big deal. There's no stagflation. But I think if you take a step back, something happened before the 1970s, right? They put in Arthur Burns. Obviously, it was right in the beginning of the 1970s, but this is when he was the Fed chair. He coincided with great inflation where he struggled with rising prices sometimes prematurely. Obviously, Nixon took us off the gold standard, but he's been considered the worst Fed chair in history. He was unable to curb inflation. I mean, if you look at the inflation numbers, same with Powell. He was unable to curb inflation, or he hasn't been able to do it. He's done here in May. He's had political interference. He's criticized for bowing to President Nixon's demands. Powell's done the same thing. He's been bowing to both Biden and Trump's demands, right? He's had misguided policies. He's resisted against aggressive rate hikes. So Powell did do aggressive rate hikes, but he's kept it up for elevated period of time. And his legacy is invoked today where central bankers dismiss inflation as transitory, echoing Burns' misjudgment in the 1970s. So the other thing with Burns, too, is that he was cutting rates and then pausing and then cutting rates and then pausing and then increasing and doing these things where it wasn't a very predictable pattern. And the thing with all of these policies is that it takes, 6 to 12 to maybe even 18 months for us to see the layover effects of these policies. So we still should have cut interest rates potentially earlier because we're seeing the, let's call it like issues with the economy right now. So if we wanted to see this, we should have cut interest rates 6, 12, 18 months earlier and not keep them as elevated. But the problem is the data sets that we get are very poor. What we see throughout this next 48 days, we've got a 75% chance that we're not going to cut, but still only a 25% chance now, right? So I still think like there's a bet. I tend to believe that as we get further along in this year, especially past the new year, this 24.4% chance will go up. I think that the Fed is all talk right now, and the Dixie's suffering, right? I've had the Dixie maybe be above 100 for like one live stream with you guys this entire time I've been doing this. I've been doing this since like May. So make sure you guys are subscribed. Help me get to 1,000 by May of next year. And I might actually put out some more videos, maybe breaking down some of these topics because, I covered it already, but the S&P 500 highest close ever above 6,900. So when we watch you know, how this economy is doing. Everybody's always looking at few different factors. The one interesting thing that I just saw here today is that rent has actually declined month over month, and it's been declining month over month for the past quarter. So that's something to keep an eye on because obviously rent is one of the highest expenses for all US citizens here. And, it's usually 30 to 50% of their entire expenses every single month. People got to have shelter over their head. People got to sleep, man. People got to live. So while I'm tracking all this, make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to keep it real short and sweet for you. And I'll catch you guys all at the next one.